In this video, I want to discuss anti-natalism, which is the philosophical position that argues we should abstain from procreation. Considering many of you probably have or know someone who has a child, the anti-natalist would argue that you have done something seriously wrong by having a child. Or in other words, we ought not to create people, and you and I were wronged in being created. David Benatar, who is a leading contemporary proponent of anti-natalism, argues from what he calls the asymmetry between pleasure and pain. When one comes into existence, both pleasure and pain are experienced, but not coming into existence entails neither pleasure or pain. In other words, you cannot miss out on what you never would have experienced in the first place. It is important to know that the anti-natalist is not arguing that we should end our current lives, but rather that it would have been better to have never been born in the first place. Even if you live a great life, there will be pain and suffering. Something as little as a headache, the anti-natalist would argue that it just would have been better to have never been born. Benatar believes the only life worth living is one completely free of pain, and if you decide to create someone, you are responsible for all the pain they will inevitably endure. In his book, Better Never to Have Been, Benatar says the following: "It is curious that while good people go to great lengths to spare their children suffering, few of them seem to notice that the one and only guaranteed way to prevent all the suffering of their children is not to bring those children into existence in the first place." So Benatar cites some relevant statistics that intend to elucidate what creating people can lead to. More than 15 million people are thought to have died from natural disasters in the last 1,000 years. Approximately 20,000 people die every day from hunger. Nearly 11 million people die every year from infectious diseases. And more than 100 million currently living women and girls have been subjected to genital cutting. In the first 88 years of the 20th century, 170 to 360 million people were beaten, shot, tortured, starved, worked to death, buried alive, hanged, drowned, and so on. In addition, 815,000 people are thought to have committed suicide in 2000. Currently, it is believed that someone commits suicide every 40 seconds. And about 40 million children are maltreated each year through physical, sexual, or emotional abuse. Aside from the philanthropic arguments, Benatar also presents the mythanthropic arguments, which points to the dark side of human nature. Benatar says, another route to antinatalism is what I call a misanthropic argument. According to this argument, humans are a deeply flawed and destructive species that is responsible for the suffering and deaths of billions of other humans and non-human animals. If that level of destruction were caused by another species, we would rapidly recommend that new members of that species not be brought into existence. Antinatalism is not a new philosophical position. Marcion of Sinope, who's pictured above, was an important early Christian figure who believed that the God who sent Jesus into the world was a different or benevolent God, as opposed to the evil God of the Old Testament. The Marcionites believed that this world was an evil creation caused by a jealous, crude, angry God, which was referred to as the demiurge. The Marcionites believed that we should reject this God, abandon this world, and not create new people. Very anti-natalist idea. Aside from the Marcionites, the Encratites, who were an early sect of 2nd century Christians, forbade marriage, and they felt that people should resist from procreation, since birth leads to death, which is another anti-natalist type position. Ultimately, no child has a say in whether it can be born or not. None of us do. Nor can we consent to such a thing. Also, no child is born for the sake of the child. This is a crucial distinction. But rather for reasons such as family pressures, religious purposes, parents' wants, and so on. The child will most likely experience more suffering than pleasure. Or there are some unfortunate children who will suffer unspeakably for their entire lives into adulthood. So the anti-natalist would conclude that in creating humans, we are knowingly contributing to the suffering of the world, and therefore it is unethical to create children. It has also been asserted that we have a duty to adopt children instead of making our own, since this would do more good than willing new sentient beings into existence.